New ancient god lore revealed. A new ancient figure Douzan has been confirmed, analyzing all the details, printing a report for Manu.
Douzan! Being compared to Nika and Nidhogg? Surely there must be something here, right? Let me just check this report. Well, it's just really one line in the story. Nika and Nidhogg will die just like Douzan. Alright. I've theorized with a lot less before, so let's go and do this. Who are you, Douzan? What are you, Douzan? Where are you from, Douzan? Are you a god, a man, a titan, a will? We're gonna find out today if it's the last thing we do in this dang video. Now, the first major possibility for who this Douzan character might actually be is a pretty heavy hitter, to say the least. I think there is a fairly big chance that my new goat, Douzan, might have been one of the gods. And he ain't your mama's god, he might just be one of the powerful figures that we've been trying to nail down for quite a while now and that Oda has been dropping like flies recently. Based on the context clues and the vitriol in Big Moo's voice, I do think that Douzan may be the Earth God of the First World. Now, why is that a possibility? Well, that's a great question. Let me get into it. We don't really have, of course, like exactly a lot to go off with Dozy Boy, but something that we do have is who Imu compares Douzan to in the first place. Because lucky for us, Imu doesn't just randomly scream about some unknown figures from history alone, no, this time at least. Imu looks at Loki and Ragnir with those beady little emu eyes and declares that Nidhogg and Nika will die just like poor old Douzan, which means that at the very least we can connect Douzan to Nika and Nidhogg. And I think you and me can at the very least agree that that's some pretty big company for good old Dozy here, because my man, Nika, is not just some random guy in One Piece. Nika is the warrior of liberation, the sun god, and Boss Hawk over here is of course tied to the ancient Elbathian mythology surrounding the world's destruction and the divine beast of Elbaf. And so based on the Harley text and the mural in Elbaf, it does seem like both of these figures appear deeply connected to the first world of One Piece. Meaning that we can at the very least safely tie Douzan to the first world of One Piece, at least for now. Which is why I ask again, what if Douzan was the name of the Earth God, the other mythological figure that was presented during the First World alongside Nika, and presumably also alongside Nidhogg and the Hellflame Serpent that we of course see in the mural from chapter 1138. Something that might even be tied to the chapter number itself, by the way, seeing as these three figures would first be revealed in chapter 1138, and now we've got chapter 1183 giving all their names. Like it would be a pretty Oda thing to do, as he loves playing with the chapter numbers. Now that's of course a little bit of a pull here, but the real point is that this could work out pretty well regardless. Hey, it's me, didn't expect me, the Admiral. Welcome aboard to all my Marines out there. I've got a brand new training regimen for all you new recruits, and it's in the form of the ultimate naval crossover, because today's video, Mona doesn't know it yet, is sponsored by World of Warships, which is teaming up with Azure Lane. In this tactical team-based shooter, you can now take control of 8 all-new commanders like Marco Polo, Tashkent, and Harbin in some epic naval battles with 6 new Azure Lane themed ships. Not even Admiral Garp and his ships can hold a candle to these mighty vessels. Just don't tell him I said that. He kinda scares me a little bit. This free-to-play game incorporates 650 historical ships spread across 13 different nations, and with 5 different ship classes to explore, you can find the perfect gameplay experience for you. Invite your friends into a division or join a clan online and team up to enjoy constantly evolving gameplay with new content dropping every month. After playing, I kinda feel like I could actually finally get the promotion, so thanks to World of Warships, I'll conquer the seas in the name of Akainu. Download World of Warships for free using the link and my code Azure Lane Wave 8 to claim your Azure Lane starter pack now. Now, of course, at this point, I feel like I have to address a point that I can hear you rushing in the comments for already, because usually when people discuss the Earth God in One Piece as theories, right, the big assumption tends to be that Emu is the character holding that very role, the ruler seated literally above the world on the big giant red slab of rock, whom Zebek and Teach both call the world who's trying to create Emu's perfect world. I'm telling you, Crocodile and Enel both of course foreshadowed Emu 2 with their God and Utopia plans, but what if that assumption is actually wrong? Not the entire Utopia thing, the Emu being the Earth God thing. What if Emu isn't the original Earth God, but the figure who replaced or usurped him? Because, I kinda hate to say it, the planet is called the Blue Planet, not Earth, and Emu being the Earth God because he is the world doesn't quite fit as nicely as, I think you and me maybe wanted it to, at least if we're trying to bring the wordplay into it as well. Now, of course, Emu could control the ground, the actual Earth, and that's kind of what's going on here, but we really have never seen that before either. Emus shooting sick omen flames and abyss circles, not earthy rock blasts last I checked at the very least, and when it comes to the nameplay, Douzan itself, it just ties way better into any Earth God associations than Emu ever possibly could. Now in Japanese, Douzan is a compound word that actually is the two kanji for copper and mine, so it's referring to a copper mine, a mine deep within the earth, and that sounds kind of small and random at first, but we do know that Oda loves using these names for villains and characters. Nika is the sound of laughter and a grin. Zaza is the sound of the rain pouring down. Mu means emptiness, the void. Eneru's name comes from the word energy, which just literally means energy. Point is, it's pretty commonplace for Oda to name characters like this, so Douzan is named after copper, an earthy mineral. A natural occurring metal pulled from underground. I feel like that's got Earth God written all over it, baby. And of course, obviously, with the name meaning copper mine, we've kind of got to talk at this point about the massive mine shaft that seems to be descending deep underground into the earth on the right side of the mural right here. So what if Douzan was connected to the earth itself? I've actually been proposing that the first world was maybe built around extracting power from beneath the planet for a long time now, and maybe the reason that Douzan is named Douzan is to connect him actively to that mineshaft and the industry we see in the mural. If Douzan ruled over the world as its original Earth God, then maybe the mines themselves were actually considered sacred, whatever they were actually extracting there. Explaining the depiction of halos, the omen halos above their heads. Maybe they connect the people to the forbidden sun beneath the earth, the power that Douzan originally claimed. After all, in Japanese culture, copper is even associated with purity and natural energy flow, which is honestly very fitting for the kind of mythological god vibes that Oda would be going for with a character like Douzan. I love that we're getting more historic names dropped left and right at this point. That's actually what I've been hoping for a while now. And maybe that also explains, Omen in general, the voice of all things-esque power that Emu uses, because Omen may be Douzan's power, the spirit and soul that exists in everything on the planet, on the earth. Maybe, I don't know, sometimes I just toss things out because it sounds pretty cool to me. It also forms a nice little trifecta of enemies in the first world. That's right, enemies. Just because Douzan is called out by Emu here, of course, doesn't mean that Douzan by default was just a good guy. Douzan may have been a human who was greedy and claimed the Forbidden Sun and Omen, and Nika was the one who struck them down. After all, we do know that Nika and Nidhogg seem to clash in the past, and Nidhogg's whole vibe is, of course, destruction, lightning, death, and the entire shebang that we get. And don't even get me started on Nika, because that guy just kind of shows up and the first world ends. In no way, shape, or form are we actually correct to assume that all of these figures are unambiguously good people or good characters. If actually, I'm not even sure any of these people are objectively good. I kind of get the feeling that they're all kind of in a very morally gray area. Remember that Vegapunk made it very clear that the ancient history of One Piece is an absolute mess, and Oda's been playing with the idea of everything being a gray area for like literally ages at this point. I don't think we'll just get a clear cut, these guys were the good guys, they fought for, humanity and freedom, Emu very bad. Like, I don't think that's gonna be where we're gonna be at by the end of this entire confrontation. So, all of that is to say that Douzan could very well be the evil king at the center of this clash. Douzan, Nika, and Nidhogg, 3 fated enemies from the First World who are all awake on Elbaf duking it out. Emu using Douzan's powers, Luffy using Nika's powers, and Loki using Nidhogg's powers. Right, and this kind of feels tight. I like it, but I don't know, I'm not 100% sold on it just yet, maybe because we're literally speculating on a single line from like one thing that Emu said. We're not even close to being done, because while the Earth God is currently my front runner for who Douzan is, I'd be an absolute fool to just analyze that option and not consider some of the other really fun and cool possibilities for who else this, like, apparently legendary character might have been that Emu is talking about on the same level as these other gods. Now, admittedly, this second option here is definitely a little bit more out there, but since I just discussed it in a recent video, I kind of felt obligated to take just a minute to talk about it as well, because recently I made a whole video discussing the possibility that some of the giant ancient animals in One Piece may not actually just be animals at all. This video here, link below if you haven't seen it yet. Absolute icons like Biblo, Zunisha, potentially even some of the Sea Kings, all of them may actually contain human souls or personalities or just identities trapped inside these giant, ancient, like possibly immortal creatures. Presumably through the use of something like the Ope Ope no Mi, but hey, magic could be involved too for all we know, or something else crazy going on here. And because of that, there is a tiny part of my uber big brain here wondering, what if Douzan isn't dead at all? What if Douzan was actually transformed? Emu thinks that Douzan is dead, very obviously, but that doesn't mean automatically that the guy actually died. He may very well have just escaped Emu's wrath and maybe became a bird. Oh, maybe an eagle. The Elbafian eagle. Yes, the eagles are coming. I mean, yes, technically we don't know that there's an Elbafian eagle sitting on top of the world tree yet, but considering at this point we have the Nidhogg in the underworld and Ratatoskr in the form of Ragnir, the missing element of the classic Norse tale here is an eagle at the top of Yggdrasil, the world tree, or in our case, the Atom Tree. And then weirdly enough, that giant eagle, as I learned from my friend Tekking recently, has like a tiny hawk sitting on his face as well, in between his eyes. In case you aren't all up to date on your Nordic lore here, there are 3 big main central creatures who live on the world tree Yggdrasil. There are also a couple of others, like some deer and stuff, but 3 main ones. Nidhogg at the roots, eating away at it, the eagle at the top, and then Ratatoskr, who kind of carries messages between them. Maybe Douzan is the eagle of Elbaf, and that's why Emu thinks that he's dead, or maybe the eagle is dead, and Emu was right all along. It would also explain why he's saying it to Loki out of all people specifically, because maybe the connecting thread isn't that Nika, Nidhogg, and Douzan are all part of the same era, but instead maybe they're all part of the same mythology. The Elbathian myths, Nika the sun god, Nidhogg the dark dragon beast at the foot of the world tree, and Douzan the eagle. I mean, it could work. I don't know if it's like the best option, but it could absolutely work and would kind of explain a very big open hole in the Elbaf world building that we're still missing to this point. But wait, there is more. Maybe Douzan was an ancient figure from the First World, but Emu didn't kill them outright. Maybe Emu turned them into something tree-shaped, whale tree-shaped. This whale tree on Zou. Yeah, as you can tell, we're just having fun at this point, just really throwing out options because I'm so excited to get like a new powerful character from the past being dropped, and we just like seeing what fits, and then, you know, as we get more info, we can kind of judge what works the best. But I also promise that the next few ideas are gonna have a little bit more backbone, less vibey theory, technically this could be the case energy. So, what if the giant whale tree in Zou is not just a tree? What if this thing was actually once a living creature, or even a living person? You probably already know of the classic animal X tree symbolism in One Piece that has become increasingly bizarre lately, especially surrounding Elbaf and the ancient world. So if Douzan was transformed into something massive and symbolic, Imu may genuinely think that they are dead, even if some remnant of them still very much exists and is alive. And okay, well, while we're down on Crazy Train, I just have to address the really crackpot theory that crossed my mind for a moment here. Bear with me, or should I say, elephant with me. Douzan, Dozo. Alright, listen, I'm not saying that Oda is doing wordplay here. This would be like kind of bad wordplay if he actually did, but am I saying the community is going to do the wordplay here? Maybe. I mean, personally, I think this idea is very much a stretch, at least compared to the Earth God theory. This option feels a lot weaker overall. There's just less direct evidence connecting Douzan to ancient animals specifically, outside of, you know, the broader themes involving souls and giant creatures and ancient punishment. So if not this, who else could this Douzan figure be, if not the Earth God? Oh, what's that noise? Gojo, quick, take cover. Yeah, I think he's here. Joyboy has returned. Or should I say, Douzan has returned. Yeah, you know what, no, I'm not having it. I don't think that Douzan is Joyboy, but before I can get to the ideas that really square up properly against the Earth God theory, I think we kind of have to address the Joyboy thing too. I'm pretty confident there are going to be some people at least who are confident that Joyboy is Douzan and Joyboy's real name is Douzan, and I need to at least try and explain why I personally think that that's very unlikely first. And don't get me wrong, if you were someone who was thinking this, I absolutely get it. I understand that one of the first theories people are gonna jump to after hearing this name is, what if Douzan is just Joyboy's real name? Because what mother would ever name their kids Joyboy? That must be a made-up, like, nickname of a young dumb guy. And look, technically, yeah, it's possible, but to be 100% real with you here, I'd rather bash my head into a wall while two guys in steel-toe boots kick me in the shins before I accept that this is a likely option here. And yeah, that's coming from this guy. The guy who wants every woman in the series to be Luffy's mom and also Crocodile. But seriously, I really don't think that this one works very well at all for a couple of reasons. In fact, I'd argue this is probably one of the weakest options on the board right now, specifically because of one very important issue. Imu already knows who Joyboy is, of course, and more importantly, Imu has called him Joyboy like 2 chapters ago by name. Whenever Imu references Joyboy, there's never any hesitation or ambiguity here. The giant straw hat feels connected directly to Joyboy. The fear surrounding Luffy awakening Nika kind of seems to tie back directly to Joyboy. Even the Gorosei themselves specifically recognize that name and its significance. When that bad boy exploded and Imu got a whole faceload of Joyboy's sweet and salty haki, he didn't go like, ah, Douzan, while he sweated and whimpered. He went, Joyboy, and then huffed and puffed until he damn near blew all of Marijoa down. So, riddle me this, Batman. If Douzan were Joyboy, why would Imu suddenly switch names now? Especially during this very heated rant aimed at Loki while they're still fighting and his absolute unit of a pet Ragnir. I don't know, it just kind of feels random and off to me. So again, not that it can't be the case, but seems very unlikely. Nidhogg and Nika will die just like Douzan. That doesn't really sound like someone revealing a secret identity. It just sounds like Imu is listing a third figure, one of his old, comrades from the first or second world, especially if Joyboy did actually, use the Nika fruit to fight Imu during the second world. That would then kind of be like saying Nika and Nidhogg will die like Joyboy, the guy who comes after Nika, theoretically. Like, I don't really think so. If Douzan was Joyboy, then why compare Nika to Douzan at all, right? That's basically comparing Nika to himself, unless Oda is doing some crazy ultra layered thing here where like Joyboy's name is Douzan, but the world thinks he's Nika, but for some reason his friends call him Joyboy instead of Douzan. But then again, why would Imu call him that? I just really don't think that it works. I mean, I don't know, maybe I'm gonna be wrong, but I don't really think so, not this time. I may not know who Douzan is, but I'm fairly confident in who Douzan isn't. To me, Douzan really feels like a completely unique, new, different figure from the ancient world, not the Joyboy we already know a lot about, but potentially someone even older, someone like another god that we got confirmation about recently that they actually exist, like the war god of Elbaf. Now, this right here, mwah, baby, this is the good stuff. A real challenger, I think, to the Earth God theory. The more I sat with it, the more it kind of weirdly started clicking into place, because it's of course not without its flaws, but the idea that Douzan is the name of the war god of Elbaf, whom up until now I've kind of just been calling Elbaf since that's what Dory and Broggy called him way back on Little Garden, actually makes a surprisingly good amount of sense. Dear viewer, remember the true context of Imu's line here. To me, it's the biggest point of evidence that we have for Douzan, and it matters a lot here, I think. Instead of focusing on who the line is about, we must instead look at who the line is delivered to. Imu is specifically calling out to Loki and Ragnir while referencing Nika and Nidhogg alongside Douzan. Now, I briefly touched on it when I was howling about the eagle earlier, but it is very important in this case as well. Nika and Nidhogg aren't just random names in the One Piece world anymore. Those titles are deeply tied to Elbafian mythology specifically. Nika is an Elbafian god. The Harley text is the tale of Nika, the rule, the law of Nika, something that I'm actually going to dig into a lot more in my next video on Tuesday, so, stay tuned for that one. But spoiler alert, I went back and reread all of Elbaf until now in Japanese, and there's so much I kind of missed, especially in the mural and all the Nika lore, that I think hasn't really settled in what it actually means. But, not super relevant for today. We'll get to it on Tuesday. You just need to know that the Harley text is specifically the saga of Nika, which means that Douzan may very well just be an Elbafian figure too. According to Gerald's story, the ancient war god of Elbaf once wielded Ragnir the Hammer, he was accompanied by Ratatoskr, and also wielded the Nidhogg fruit itself. That's absolutely huge, because suddenly we have this very interesting possibility where Douzan isn't some separate god that rivaled Nidhogg and Nika, but he may be the man who wielded the power of Nidhogg to clash with Nika, the ancient war god himself. And honestly, narratively, I'm absolutely digging it, because the context for this line in chapter 1183 suddenly takes on a very different tone than I personally ever read it with. What Imu is actually doing in that moment is directly just mocking Loki, right? Like all the kids did to me during dodgeball on the playground. Imu is looking at Loki and saying, I've seen this before. I already watched the last person who inherited these powers die before. And that's kind of brutal, man, especially because Loki right now is basically becoming a modern reflection of that ancient Elbafian warrior already. He has Ragnir now, which is now both the hammer and Ratatoskr, and he also has the Nidhogg fruit, so Loki may just be the next Douzan, and Imu's calling his shot, saying, just like that old fool Douzan and like Nika and the original Nidhogg, you will also die here. And from the top ropes, I bring even more evidence for this. There's even a fun little meta connection that I found that makes this feel even more accurate and fun. While Douzan means copper mine literally in Japanese, there's actually another Douzan that I found that Oda could be pulling from to reference this ancient figure, because Elbathians, as you might know, the giants, are very often connected to famous wrestlers and wrestling references. Dory and his Terry sword are named after Dory Funk Jr. and his brother Terry Funk. Broggy and his Bruiser axe are named after Bruiser Brody. Stanson and Ripley, Stan Hansen and Rhea Ripley. Goldberg, that's a wrestler. By the way, quick shout out to the Reddit user CrewOrdinary8872 for making a nice, very cool, clean list here. Appreciate you, big dog. So clearly, we've seen Oda pull from wrestling for the Giants, and when you Google the name Douzan and look if there's any names related to it, you find that there happens to be a very famous wrestler named Riki Douzan, which is funny because I then realized I should have known about the guy because he's crazy famous. Riki Douzan is hailed as a national hero in Japan after World War II specifically, and has this like godlike status as the father of puroresu, pro wrestling, in Japan. If you're ever planning to come here to Japan and like do anything about wrestling, you might probably encounter his name somewhere, especially if you go to one of the shows. If you're going to come up with a name then for an Elbathian god, one of the OG ones, Douzan is just a perfect title. Also, in case you're curious, I just quickly looked it up. The kanji for Riki Douzan are actually power mountain path. So I don't know. If you have any ideas how that could play into One Piece, let me know. So, is that it? Douzan is the warrior god of Elbaf? Well, not so fast. I do must admit that there is something here that I'm personally kind of hung up on that's making it really hard for me to fully commit to this idea. This theory runs into a pretty major problem once you actually start examining the timeline a little bit closer. Actually, scratch that idea. It runs into one of the biggest timeline problems, at least in terms of how I and many others tend to interpret the timeline that we feel like has been established by Oda so far. Because if Douzan was the war god of Elbaf, then when exactly did he fight Nika? Personally, I've kind of always been operating under the assumption that the story that Jarul told us about the war god, Ratatoskr, and his Nidhogg fruit being used to fight Nika was not from the first world itself. Since the war god used the Nidhogg fruit, not was Nidhogg, but used the Nidhogg fruit, I think it's a much safer bet to assume that he fought Joyboy, who already had the Nika fruit, and so the Elbathian legend that Jarul is speaking of might have been a misattribution of Nika onto Joyboy. But then, if we're to believe that Douzan is the war god of Elbaf and he used the Nidhogg fruit to clash with the original Nika from the first world, that would mean that devil fruit seemingly already existed by that point. Alright, trust me, I've been racking my brain over this for hours. I kind of had a 3-hour discussion with my entire team trying to sort out every single option for how this might possibly work out, because in my mind, it would open up a massive can of worms. Because if Douzan fought Nika in the first world while using the Nidhogg fruit, then suddenly devil fruits have potentially existed since the very beginning of civilization itself, and on the right side of the mural, we're seeing Douzan clash with the Hellflame Serpent, right? And while that's definitely not impossible, it would just mean that like the entire line of the second world of the forest god sending for demons might be something else and actually not connected to devil fruits, or in a different way than we thought. It is absolutely not what most of us, including me, have been assuming, and it does make the timeline weirdly messy, because when did Nidhogg then exist? Did Nidhogg ever exist, or have they always just been devil fruits? On top of that, did Nika actually exist as a real person? Like, who actually existed in One Piece? Who was real before the devil fruits? And what are fruits in relation to these people? Like, zone fruits specifically, what's the deal here? It kind of feels like zones are based on existing figures who became a fruit or had their spirit embodied by a fruit. that's what Ratatoskr seems to point towards, right? So his soul became a fruit, then was eaten by the hammer Ragnir, and now we've got a hammer fruit squirrel. As you know, a huge amount of current One Piece theories kind of operate under the assumption that devil fruits are connected to the Ancient Kingdom, or the Great Kingdom as, I don't know. You know, it's the Great Kingdom, but we keep saying Ancient Kingdom. Born from human desires later in history, tied to this advanced technology of the Second World, or maybe even being artificially created during or after at the end of the Void Century. But have we ever stopped and considered what if the First World already had mythical zones running around like at that point? Because then suddenly the entire historical timeline of the One Piece world gets pushed back way further than we all expected. And honestly, if that's the case, then what or who exactly was Nika and the, like seriously, like look me in the eyes. What is Nika at this point? Was Nika a real god? A giant? A title held by the wielder of a devil fruit based after him? Was Nika a devil fruit user, or did the fruit get based on a figure, Nika, like my good buddy Arthur actually pitched a while ago in his theory about Nika maybe being a comic book character that Joyboy made a fruit based on? Or was he some guy from space who was just very powerful and people like conflated him with being magical? Like, even if any of these options are true, that still becomes incredibly messy, because who then liberated the first world? Some other guy, the OG guy who made the first Nika fruit, and then Joyboy just claimed it next? Anyhow, I don't want to get too lost in the weeds here because it's kind of been giving me a big headache. That's why I'm a little bit hesitant still on the entire War God being Douzan thing, because it's gonna kind of upend my entire theory headspace, and I don't know if I have the emotional capacity to handle that today and shift my entire One Piece worldview from like one thing to the other. Undeniably though, one thing I feel really confident about is that Douzan being tied directly to Elbaf feels extremely likely, because there is just no way that Oda has Imu scream, "Nidhogg and Nika will die just like Douzan," and it not mean something to the specific guys he's shouting at. And I'm gonna shout at you, my good friend, to go check out Manuscript, my Magic the Gathering channel, where I'm currently learning the extensive lore of that universe, which I will say, if you like One Piece lore, this stuff is very One Piece coded. Seriously, even if you don't play Magic or know anything about it, the lore is absolutely awesome to learn about. Urza and Mishra feel like Joyboy and Emu. Alish Norn screams Emu energy. I just dropped a video on a giant Hydra god, like avatar being called Progenitus, with some insane lore that feels like the Nidhogg and Nika. I generally think that you would love it, and if you're a Magic fan, then even better. Link below, and also the channel is just linked in general. With that little plug out of the way, who is next? Right now, it really feels like, you know, Douzan could either be the War God of Elbaf, which we don't talk about, or the Earth Gods. Also, is it getting warmer in here? Jesus, whoa, what's that? Is that you, Douzan? Stop. Okay, I see. Okay, I see. This actually works. Chill. This feels like it could add up in a couple of different ways. Is Douzan the name of the Hellflame Serpent? Not the Earth God himself, but his loyal servant or tortured prisoner or Pokemon buddy? Once you actually start trying to line Douzan up with the actual figures that Emu is referencing, the timeline, the mural imagery, and the mythology of the entire First World, one figure kind of starts matching suspiciously well. Greater than just the Earth God themselves, the missing link feels like it's actually the Hellflame Serpent. Because unlike some of the other options that we've discussed so far, like the War God or Biblo or Joyboy, the Hellflame Serpent actually matches the presumed time period of the figure. Gojo, Jesus. Look who came and wanted to say hello to everyone. Or not. Ooh. Now you're just leaving again? You don't want to go back out now. He just meowed to let him in, and now he wants to leave again. You gonna chill there for a while, buddy? All right. Alright. Unlike some of the other options we've discussed so far, like the War God, Biblo, or Joyboy, the Hellflame Serpent actually matches the presumed time period of the figures that Emu seems to be referencing here. Nika and Nidhogg both seem like they're from the currently known oldest mythology in the series, the First World itself. Isn't that right, Gojo? No? Alright. If Douzan belongs alongside those names, then Douzan likely needs to be a figure from the same ancient layer of history, a being that rivals the Sun God and the Nidhogg in actual status, and on the mural, that massive flaming hell serpent kind of seems like, I don't know, maybe it's just me, a pretty perfect candidate for this. He's giant and strong, around during the First World according to the Harley, and clashed with the Nidhogg and Nika according to the Harley and the mural, and the mural doesn't just depict gods and monsters, it depicts that big mineshaft, the thing that I've been tying to Douzan's name, and you know who's erupting from those mines, defending them on the mural? The Hell Flame Serpent, because remember, Douzan commonly refers to a copper mine in Japanese, a mine deep underground, tunneling into the earth, and while I kind of used that in the Earth God argument to connect Douzan ruling over the mines, the Hellflame Serpent theory twisted idea into something much, much bigger, much cooler, and way more tragic. Because what if Douzan isn't the king of the underground, but instead, Douzan is the thing underground? I've said it before, and I will say it again, the Hellflame Serpent really feels a lot like Godzilla, only longer and more snake-like, like a snake. Not like some random monster, but more like this primordial subterranean titan representing Earth itself, the planet itself, a creature buried and tied to the core of the world, tied to this big old nuclear power source, the forbidden sun that everyone and their mom is talking about. What if Douzan is the power that the Earth God wields and has tamed in a very unusual demonic way, potentially through the use of the Abyss or Domi Reversi, and Emu no longer has that power, which is why Emu specifically talks about Douzan dying. The context for the line may not be that Emu is talking about Douzan in a braggadocious way, he's flexing that he killed Douzan and now uses his powers. A world-ending beast from beneath the earth that Emu already defeated, a beast natural to this world that rivaled Nika and Nidhogg, the third member of the First World Titanic Trinity. And to be completely real with you, that kind of makes Emu's threat towards Loki and Luffy feel way more sinister, because Nika and Nidhogg will die just like Douzan could be like Emu's hardest line in the series, because the actual context might be, I have already slain one of the godly beings from the previous world before, and I will do it again. Also, I do want to point out that it kind of, next to the Godzilla parallel, it kind of has really cool Lord of the Rings vibes, how the dwarves kind of get too greedy and they dig too deep for mithril, and they find like all these ores, and then what happens? They end up waking up one of the Balrogs, an ancient being of flame and shadow that has been sleeping, since the First World. Actually, now that I think about it, that's like a crazy parallel. Jesus Christ, is the Hellflame Serpent just a Balrog? A being of fire and shadow that, has been sleeping in the earth since the First World, and they tunneled too deep, they got too greedy, and then they woke it up. Yes, I will let you out, Gojo. Thanks for stepping by. Say goodbye. Say goodbye to everyone, at least, if you already leave. Goodbye. Goodbye. Where were we? All right, the Balrog and the Hellflame Serpent thing. Now, granted, this theory overall does create another awkward little issue for me personally, because it kind of messes with my personal Mu idea. If you don't know, I proposed in this video right here that Mu might be the name of the Hellflame Serpent and a civilization from the First World, but maybe that's just half true. It's not the serpent's name, it's just the country's name. But honestly, if I'm wrong about that, that's okay too, because at the end of the day, this is theory crafting. I'm trying to piece together fragments of mythology from a single line of dialogue, which is very fun. We have the mural and 4 pages of ancient giant lore. Some theories are naturally gonna contradict each other, especially as each new chapter rolls out, and Oda has just been feeding us well with the ancient history lore and new characters. Weirdly enough though, the fact that this theory creates fewer contradictions with the timeline than the War God theory actually makes me like it a little bit more. So right now, if you force me to put money on any specific identity for Douzan, I think that the Hellflame Serpent might genuinely be the frontrunner. But regardless of who Douzan turns out to be, there is still one other glaring thing that we still have to discuss, because it straight up might not matter who Douzan is, but what they represent. Who followed them, or better yet, who inherited Douzan's will, the will of D. Okay, so now that we've gone through all these possibilities, I do think I've landed on one conclusion, that the exact identity of Douzan might not even be the most important part of their character, because whether Douzan was the Earth God, the War God of Elbaf, Joyboy, the Eagle, or the Hellflame Serpent, there is one thing almost every version of this guy seems to ripple out from. The will of D may just very well be Douzan's will. Something that seems to come from the first world, or at the very least was shared among rival figures from the second world. Now, why do I say that? Well, because one of the biggest problems right now with the D is Joyboy's allies idea is a very specific figure, Davy D. Jones, who, based on Zebek and Teach's whole vibe, doesn't seem like the guy who was heavily pro-Joyboy. At the very least, based on this line that Zebek tossed at Emu asking him who scared him more, Davy D. Jones or Joyboy. Since Davy Jones has the will of D, I kind of feel like he probably is from the Void Century, right? And that he inherited his will from someone in the first world. And so maybe both Davy D. Jones and Joyboy both have the will of D from a common person. If Joyboy even had the will of D, of course, we don't even know that for a fact at all. It may be why Joyboy failed in the Void Century even, that he wasn't a D member. Again, I think it's a very common assumption that the D clan were people tied to Joyboy, but we actually don't know that at all for certain. I mean, I think it fits, especially if there are 12 D clans and the wordplay here is dozen and dozen, right? Especially if the wordplay that Oda is going here for with his katakana version of the name being dozen and Douzan, right? And it actually really means the will of the 12 who follow Joyboy, like his Jesus apostles or something. Like, since we actually know that Lily was a D member and so was Davy, but we do not know if Joyboy himself was a D. Davy D. Jones and Lily may have sailed with Joyboy, but it could just be that the will of D is actually connected to Douzan from the first world instead. Maybe Luffy's true power, the reason that he can change the world when Nika and Joyboy couldn't, is because they didn't have the will of Douzan. Luffy may be the perfect cross-section of Douzan's will and Nika's powers, which could tie perfectly into an old idea I've always had, that Roger wanted to kind of breed Ace to be the next Sun God, since he too would have been a Dozer will carrier and a Sun God fruit user. Maybe the big secret on Laugh Tale is that in order to defeat Emu, the person now using Douzan's body or powers for themselves, you must actually carry the will of Douzan and liberate him from Emu's clutches. I mean, I think it would kind of feel right, and that's what matters most of these cases. Or not. I mean, all I know is that Douzan seems to be a third new powerful figure from the ancient past, just like Nidhogg and Nika. Three titans. The three skulls. Okay, Douzan might actually perfectly explain the three skulls, because if you want to know more about that, why Emu has three skulls, why Blackbeard has three skulls, why Ors have three skulls, why Tot Musica has three skulls, if you want to find that out and how to connect Douzan to it, you should check out this video right here, where I break everything down. Otherwise, thanks for watching, thanks so much to all of our fantastic Patreons, and I will hopefully see you on Tuesday for that video that I promised you.